Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CPA Reach Code webinar, How to Reduce THC Emissions in Buildings. We're just going to give everyone a few minutes to get logged into the webinar, and then we'll kick it off at about 11:02. Hello, everyone. Great to see so many people showing up on time. We're just going to give everyone a couple more minutes here before we kick off with the agenda and the webinar. All right, we are at 11:02, so we'll go ahead and kick off the webinar. Hello, everyone again. My name is Tim Insalvis. I will be your moderator today for the CPA Reach Code webinar, How to Reduce GHG Emissions in Buildings. I'm a program manager at TRC, and we're an environmental research and consulting firm that has a specialty in energy codes and policy development. And we help to implement this program on behalf of the Clean Power Alliance. I'm excited to introduce you to our action-packed agenda for today's webinar. First, we'll start off with a warm welcome from Ted Bardaki, CPA's Chief Executive Officer. Next, CPA's Reach Code Program Manager, Shiko Manarola, will give us updates and reminders on the CPA Reach Code program. Next, we'll set some foundational context for today's webinar with one of TRC's technical Reach Code experts, Taylor, and she'll provide everyone with updates post the Berkeley ruling, as well as the interest we have seen to move forward with Reach Code strategies throughout the state. Next, we'll have a case study of one of the leading examples of jurisdictions pushing forward with Reach Codes. Ariana Vito and Nico Predock of the city of Santa Monica will give us an overview of their Reach Code efforts and some lessons they've learned from pursuing their comprehensive approach to reduce greenhouse gases in their new construction and existing buildings. Next, Taylor would join us again to give us an overview of the resources and model codes available through the program and CPAReachCode.org website. And then we'll hop into stakeholder support and the importance of equity. In this section, our technical team members, Sammy Taylor from Ramey Associates, will give us an overview of stakeholder support strategies we guide and support our program participants through. And Grace Hutt from Strategic Actions for a Just Economy, or SAGE for short, will give us an overview of important equitable policy adoption examples and how we can protect renters that these Reach Codes are meant to benefit. Last but not least, we'll have a Q&A section at the end to address any of your questions. So now I'll go over some quick housekeeping items before we dive into the content. First, I wanted to note that we are recording this webinar, and we will be sharing the recording and slides via the CPAReachCodes.org website. This slide here shows an overview of the functions of Zoom found in the control panel at the bottom center of your screen. To enable captions, please click the Show Captions button on the bottom right-hand icon in the middle control panel. Next, the Q&A will allow you to enter questions throughout the webinar. Questions will be accepted throughout and answered at the end. On the next slide, To enter your questions, simply click the Q&A button and type in your questions to the chat box, and we'll do our best to answer all of your questions at the end. We will take a short Q&A break after the City of Santa Monica presents, but the majority of the questions will be answered at the end. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the CEO of Clean Power Alliance, Ted Bardaki, to kick us off with opening remarks. Take it away, Ted.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Just a quick, wanted to provide a quick welcome and thanks everyone for being here. Couple of thoughts, high-level thoughts of mine on the importance of REACH codes, but also sort of how we look at this, strategically within the overall sort of Clean Power Alliance mission. I think you're going to see throughout this webinar, a number of benefits of pursuing REACH codes, whether that's for new buildings, existing buildings, or all of the above. One that's not mentioned that I think about a lot in the context of Clean Power Alliance is who is our real competitor as an organization? We talk a lot about competing with Southern California Edison on, price, on environmental performance, on programs that we offer to our customers. And that really is true day to day. We do compete with Edison. We also partner with them, obviously, on delivering the electricity, but also on billing and as well as on policy and stuff like electrification. But really, sort of more fundamentally, Clean Power Alliance's competitors is the oil and gas industry. We are in a fight for market share for buildings with the gas industry and in transportation with the oil industry. And obviously, we are the cleaner option in that competition for market share. And so part of the idea of REACH codes is to give that boost through actions at the local level, which bring lots of benefits at the local level, but it also at the regional and statewide level for helping the environment and helping our grabbing of market share for fuel in that competition between electricity and oil and gas. So that's one sort of big picture thing that I wanted to communicate. The second thing that I think is really important is the real emphasis in this area needing to move soon, and not just soon because of the climate crisis, but also for a couple of other reasons. One is for those of us who are worried about housing prices, and looking at the local housing plans and all of that, we do expect a boom in new construction over the next few years, and getting electric or near electric or all electric buildings in place and codes for that to be encouraged ahead of this increase in new construction was really important, because we know that the cheapest and best time to get electrification measures in is as a comprehensive new construction program. That's where it's most cost effective, where it's easiest, and frankly, where we will prevent generation of consumption of natural gas in buildings. So getting ahead of new construction as our cities seek to expand the supply of housing is really important. But also, just a little more technical, the 3-year code cycle is going to start to bump up against some mandatory, either regional in our case or statewide regulations, and start to push the envelope in this same electrification direction through different measures. And then, the codes won't necessarily be as important. And, as we bump up against that code cycle, it's been my experience that it rarely hurts to get ahead of mandates. And so if folks can be adopting local codes that are, get ahead of the mandates, when you get to implementation, it gets a lot easier. And you're already got processes in place for adopting those things. So that is a real big reason why we're making a real push for folks to start to adopt, or at least investigate at a deeper level, the ability to put in a reach code in your local city. And finally, I think that, I think it's been momentum, obviously, because of the Berkeley decision, has been slowed. And we've spent a lot of time internally reconceptualizing what a reach code might look like, that would withstand legal scrutiny. And we think we've got, together with a bunch of partners from around the state, a really good framework, and are excited to share some of that framework with you today, as you all consider what to do, with the idea clearly of improving environmental performance at the local level, and getting ahead of state mandates. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to Tim, who can conduct us through the rest of the time. Thanks, Tim.
Thank you so much, Ted. Great words there, and encouragement to all to definitely take advantage of the program. Yeah, we're here to help. So it's my pleasure to pass it off to the CPA Reach Code Program Manager, Chico Manarola.
Hey everyone, thank you Ted, and thank you Tim for leading us today this morning. And welcome everyone, my name is Chico Manarola, the Program Manager for the Reach Code Program at Clean Power Alliance. We're excited that you could join us today to discuss our Reach Code program and the model codes that we have developed to help our member agencies move forward with electrification and the resulting greenhouse gas savings. You know that for many of you, Reach codes are important parts of your climate action plans. Let's go to the next slide. So here are some of our relevant staff that some of us you've probably talked to, others you may not know as well. On the left-hand side, there you see myself and our customer programs director, Joanne O'Neill. Probably had a lot of conversations with folks on our government affairs team, like Gina Goodhill, Joseph Cabral, Dalia Gomez, and Kendall Asuncion. We're all here to help you on your journey for Reach Codes. If you have any questions, we'll provide some contact information at the end of this presentation, but you're always free to reach out to myself or anyone here, and we'll make sure you get to the right person to keep having those discussions. Next slide. So program purpose, why do we have this program? So our main goal is to increase the number of our member agencies that have Reach codes in order to speed up and equitably decarbonize electrification, or I should say building electrification. These are great ways of improving health indicators like asthma in your jurisdictions, and they support regional and state electrification goals. Next slide. So some of you are probably very familiar with Reach codes. I know we've had some conversations to this program with a number of you others that might be newer. So the very high level definition, we'll get into more detail on what specific reach codes are out there, who's passing them, and what a new model code will look like. Generally, there are local ordinances adopted by a local government that exceed and enhance the state's green building standards. And they can happen in a couple of different ways. One is for new construction, so for new buildings, and the other is for existing buildings. Now, a lot of jurisdictions have already passed new construction codes. Prior to the Berkeley decision, we were already over 70 jurisdictions in the state. Fewer jurisdictions have passed existing building codes, but we're seeing a lot of movement on that side and a lot of movement from our member agencies here. And additionally, you can have an electric vehicle infrastructure reach code. This is for charging for electric vehicles at buildings. A lot of these are done, these kinds of reach codes are done in concert with new construction or existing building codes, but you can also do them independently. Next slide, please. So, we've already mentioned the Ninth Circuit and how it's affected reach codes. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but generally I wanted to give you an overview of our program and how we got here and why are we having this particular webinar. So first of all, our reach code program launched in February 23. That's when we got board approval for the budget. And then immediately after that, we started scheduling kickoff meetings for Los Angeles and Ventura County. And literally the day before, the Ninth Circuit ruling came out that invalidated Berkeley's natural gas ban. And while the kinds of reach codes we were anticipating our member agencies would be looking into were not going to be gas bans, it still kind of upended the entire background of codes that were going to be looked at moving forward. And it really caused us to touch base with our stakeholders and other folks to figure out what are the best paths forward for member agencies. And that kind of led us to develop new model codes that we think limit risk to member agencies while also leading to significant greenhouse gas reductions in buildings and helping our member agencies look towards the new 25 codes that will be coming out in the future. So today, and so that development happened over the last year or so, and today we're doing this relaunch webinar to let folks know about these new model codes and to encourage anyone who's interested to take advantage of the program. And just as a heads up to folks, our program it's been going on for about a year and a half. It's currently set to end at the end of 2024, but that still gives you time to investigate codes and take them to council and avail yourself of the support you have from CPA and from TRC. Next slide, please. All right, so who has adopted reach codes? So this is not new. As I said earlier, in the state, we have over 70 jurisdictions that have passed them. And in our territory, we have a number of jurisdictions that have also already passed reach codes. You can see that list on the slide here, including Agoura Hills, Los Angeles and Ventura County, Ojai, West Hollywood, and Santa Monica. And we have a number of jurisdictions who are already participating in our reach code program. And that includes Ojai, Rolling Hills Estates, Santa Monica, and West Hollywood. Now, some of these folks are pursuing existing building codes, and we have a couple folks who are either creating a new construction code or looking at how they can adjust their existing one. But the gist here is that even after the Ninth Circuit ruling, there's a lot of movement now on reach codes, and there are a number of jurisdictions that are already taking advantage of the program and the services we offer. Next slide, please. So what are those services that people are taking advantage of? So the key offerings of this program include tools and templates, and that's model ordinances, a library of PowerPoint slides, templates, and other tools that you can use during the adoption implementation process of your reach codes, and streamlined delivery based on lessons learned. Again, TRC has worked with a lot of member agencies and a lot of jurisdictions throughout the state. We take all of those learnings and apply them when we work with our member agencies. Additionally, you get customization. So, today we're going to talk about sort of generalized model codes that are available to you to use. But when you work with us in this program, we'll take those model codes and really customize them to the needs of your member agency. And that includes what stipulations are in there and what exemptions are in there as well. And we provide a lot of local research on specific tools. We interpret the statewide code, and we're sort of incorporating language that's going to be in the new 2025 code into our models, and we can help you do that as you're creating a custom code for your jurisdiction. Finally, adoption support. We provide technical assistance. We will go to your city council meetings to help present on codes and take questions, facilitate public workshops to get input from your residents. And we have a lot of stakeholder engagement where we do regional collaboration. So we're in contact with Edison, with their consultants, with other CCAs, and we're coordinating with all of those programs. In addition to the support you get from TRC, we also have additional financial offerings for interested member agencies. And that includes financial assistance, $2,500 up to about $25,000 if you're looking at an existing building reach code. What that means, I'll break that down a little bit for you. If you have already passed a reach code and you want to participate, and be it a tool for peer members, someone who they can call and get some information on your experience, we're offering $2,500. For folks who are looking at taking a new construction reach code to council, we're offering $12,500. And if you're looking at an existing building code, because we know it involves additional staff time and they're a little bit newer, there aren't as many models to apply, we're offering $25,000. And that assumes, again, you take a code to council to get the full amount there. A participation agreement is required to be part of the program. We're happy to follow up with anyone interested with that agreement and talk through what that entails, and to give you more detail on the financial offerings and what's required to be awarded them. Next slide. That's all from me. Happy to take any questions later or to follow up with you directly. We have our contact information at the end of this slide. You can always reach out to me directly, and I'll pass it back over to Tim.
Thank you so much, Chico, for that overview. Now we're going to do a quick poll to gauge the audience. So we're going to launch a poll here. If you could all entertain us with answering these questions. We have a couple questions for you to kind of understand everyone in the audience and their experience with reach codes. So first question, did you have a previous reach code? Second question, what do you want to learn about reach codes? And third question, what barriers are you facing with reach codes? Let's give you a minute to answer there, and then kind of see how the audience's experience with reach codes are. All right. And are we able to see some results here?
Yes, we have about 42% of people who participated in the poll, so give it a few more seconds before I close. Okay. All right, would you like me to share the results?
Yes, please. All right. So majority of you have not had a previous reach code. Actually, a majority of you are unsure. So that's a good question for us to dive into. We're happy to answer any questions that you may have, address and see if you have had a reach code before, or if you need to revise it based on everything that's happened with the Ninth Circuit ruling. And what does the audience want to learn about reach codes? How much effort does it take? Support and resources available, and what are the GHG impacts? Great, we'll definitely be covering all of that during the webinar today. And what barriers are you facing? It looks like the majority is facing all of the barriers that we've noted here. So limited resources, limited knowledge, concerned counsel, and concerned community. So the good thing is this program was designed to address all of those issues and barriers. We have lots of resources to provide you with technical assistance, model codes. We have the knowledge. As Shiko mentioned, we at TRC have been helping lots of jurisdictions throughout the state adopt reach codes. So we have a lot of experience and can help you navigate that, as well as your concerned questions from the community or your counsel. We're also there to support you during those council sessions and information sessions. So we'll go ahead and continue on. Thank you all for participating in the poll. And it's my pleasure to hand it off to Taylor, one of our reach code experts here at TRC, to provide us with updates on the Ninth Circuit Berkeley ruling and the interest we are seeing throughout the state to move forward with reach codes. Take it away, Taylor.
Great. Thank you, Tim, and thank you everybody for joining us here today. As Tim mentioned, my name is Taylor. I work for TRC, which is an environmental research and consulting company. I'm an engineer and I work as a reach code lead. So really what that means is I work with building and electric vehicle infrastructure reach codes. Excited to be chatting with you all today. Let's get started with a review of the Berkeley ruling. On the next slide, the full name being the California Restaurant Association, or CRA, versus the City of Berkeley. So this court case all started back in July of 2019 when the City of Berkeley adopted a municipal gas ban and all-electric ordinance. Shortly after, just a couple months later, this court case started with the California Restaurant Association suing them on the grounds that the ordinance was federally preempted by the Energy Policy and Conservation Act, which is known as EPCA. For the next couple of years, there were appeals and court filings as the case worked its way through this legal process, but where that ultimately got us to is at the start of this year, the Ninth Circuit Court denied an en banc rehearing of the case. At that point, Berkeley was left with two options. One, they could decide to pursue an appeal to the Supreme Court, or two, they could repeal their natural gas ban. They chose that second option and repealed their natural gas ban. And since then, those jurisdictions with similar ordinances have been trying to decide what to do. Some have decided to do nothing for now, others have paused or suspended their enforcement, and others have repealed and replaced those reach codes. So for those looking to make a change, and whether that be you have a past ordinance that's similar to Berkeley's, or you're looking to adopt a building reach code for the first time, there are other approaches available and some that could mitigate your legal risk in light of these considerations and in light of the EPCA considerations. To the next slide. So that ruling has left a lot of people wondering, like, what comes next? What can we do? On one hand, a natural gas infrastructure ban is now legally risky. On the other hand, we have a lot of ambitious state and in many cases, local decarbonization goals that we are working towards, and building emissions are a big part of those goals. So I want to take you through a timeline of some of the regional and statewide goals that I'm talking about and kind of the ongoing work in the area. So let's start with this regional subject. There are air quality management districts that are proposing zero NOx requirements beginning as early as 2026. For those of you in the South Coast Air Quality Management District, those are still being proposed and actively being worked on right now and throughout the rest of this year. So that's an area to keep up to date on and see what's going on from there. Those could start as early as 2026 and go on for several years after that, depending on what type of equipment and if it's new construction or existing buildings. So we'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide, but important to be aware that there are these regional policies in the works. And when I say zero NOx requirements, what that really effectively would mean is that in order to meet a zero NOx requirement, you would be using all electric appliances for that equipment. Now, from a statewide perspective, we have CARB, the California Air Resources Board, and they're also looking at a zero emissions appliance standard, somewhat similar to what the air quality management districts are working on now. I have this listed for 2030, but CARB is actually currently in their rulemaking process as well, and that could be as early as 2027 and leading through 2030. So they're kind of following the air quality management districts and trying to understand how they could get to zero emissions for certain appliances within the whole state of California, not just regional pockets like the Bay Area or the South Coast area. Looking a little bit further down the timeline, in 2035, we have all new car sales being zero emission vehicles and gas vehicles no longer being sold statewide. So this is really important to keep in mind when we're talking about electric vehicle infrastructure codes and how REACH codes might help you meet that goal easier or more equitably. And lastly, we have 2045, where California is looking to achieve carbon neutrality in a statewide gas pipeline projected decommissioning date. So there's a lot of different considerations, a lot of different ambitious goals in order to reduce our emissions to keep in mind as we talk about REACH codes. And on the next slide here, we'll talk a little bit more about the details about what South Coast and CARB are looking at. So they have broken up this rules, and as I mentioned, this is in the rulemaking progress. So this is currently what we know. This is open to change. But really, they've got it broken down by different appliance types. So in some cases, we have specifications and regulations proposed for water heaters, furnaces, and other equipment. And then CARB has their appliance categories broken out a little bit different as well, with boilers, water heaters, tankless water heaters, and then other. Key point here being for the next 2 years, there's a little bit of a gap here. They're not pursuing anything that immediately. They're looking a little bit further out. So that's one thing to keep in mind with CPA's program right now, is CPA could help you implement a REACH code program from now through the rest of the year and start working on limiting and reducing those emissions immediately. Whereas in the longer term context of this, as early as 2026, South Coast might have some policies coming into play with zero NOx emissions. And that would be starting first with new construction on some of these earlier timelines and also some smaller equipment sizes. And then as you move your way through this timeline, you'll see it starts incorporating all building types. So that would be new construction and existing building. And it starts including larger thresholds and below for size. So it's capturing more of that pool of appliances. Okay, so this is important to keep an eye on too from the CARB perspective and what statewide is going on. Their earliest date is looking at 2027 for boilers and water heaters. And then a little bit further out right now, they're looking at different types of appliances like tankless water heaters and furnaces in 2029. And that's subject to change for now. So talking about all of the proposed and potentially coming regulations, on the next slide, we will talk about why should we establish REACH codes. This top one we kind of already talked about, which is that the state codes and the AQMD codes aren't yet certain. They're proposed, they're in the rulemaking process, but we're not sure exactly where those will be. So it's a little bit of a gap to get through from now until when those officially start and officially are implemented. That's a period of time where buildings are still going to be emitting more than they would under the control of these proposed policies or a REACH code as well. So that's one opportunity. Second consideration is that local REACH codes have the ability to influence the state. So when local jurisdictions put these policies in place, show how they work, kind of work through the different considerations there, the state notes that and they kind of incorporate that into their policymaking at a wider level too. It can help them understand how a policy like this would work and make that a smoother implementation of those statewide requirements. So that's another benefit. The third thing is just that it allows more action sooner. So instead of waiting for certain things to come into play, you can kind of take that control yourself and reduce those greenhouse gas emissions right now. Because as we know, these appliances that we're talking about have pretty long lifespans, from 10, 15, 20, 30-year lifespans once they've already been installed. So it's really, really important that anything that we can address now, we do address, and we capture that full lifetime of the equipment emission savings. Another reason to act now is some of the existing building policies are even further out on that timeline, and existing buildings are the largest portion of our housing stock. So anything that can be started there with existing buildings now would be an exponential savings for emissions. Fourthly, I want to talk about just having like a continuous signal to the market, right? We've got a little bit of this gap between now and 2026. By adopting a REACH code, you can continue sending that message to the market and really to your community to keep people engaged, to keep them interested in what's going on here, and remind them of the mission and the message of reducing emissions in buildings. And avoid those stranded assets. If you do install a piece of gas equipment, that could be problematic once these rulings come into effect. So how can we protect people from that risk? And lastly, local control. If you want to come work with us, we can help design customized exemptions and language for your policy. And if you're a jurisdiction with a more progressive climate target, a more progressive climate action plan, we can help you reach that. We can help you specifically align on what policies would have the biggest bang for your buck. Okay, next slide. I want to talk about one of the key reasons we just discussed, right? The key reason to pursue a REACH code is to reduce emissions. So let's put those reduced emissions in context with the state of California's overall emissions. Emissions from the transportation and commercial and residential buildings account for 52% of California's inventory in 2022. And those are mainly coming from fossil fuel combustion. And nearly all of those gas appliances can be electrified, except some high temperature industrial applications. So buildings offer large opportunities for us to reduce our emissions, and they have known solutions today, which is really powerful information. On the next slide, we'll go into a little bit more detail about California buildings' gas usage. So where are we actually using gas in California? And it's broken up into these two different types, residential and non-residential. So for residential buildings, 96% of the gas usage is directed into these three categories of water heating, space heating, and cooking. For non-residential, it's a similar story, with overall 91% of our gas usage encompassing water heating, space heating, and cooking. And these are appliances that have electric alternatives and opportunities to reduce the emissions. So that's really powerful in terms of the impact that a REACH code could have that's tailored towards any one of these areas. Now, on the next slide, we'll talk about, like, what does this all boil down to? What does this really mean for our communities? We've talked about some of the technical reasons to pursue REACH codes, or statistical-based reasons to pursue REACH codes, but the real impact is on the people who are actually living in our communities. So the benefits of REACH codes include saving energy and providing resilience to communities, also reducing the cost of new construction buildings and eliminating future retrofit costs. That's a big one. If you're building all electric, you're no longer installing gas infrastructure, that can result in a savings for your first construction cost. Another benefit is just making progress towards that climate action plan. That's a plan that your community has aligned on as something that they want to pursue. So let's make progress towards that. This fourth one is huge too: improving indoor air quality and reducing combustion fire risks. So REACH codes can help improve the health and safety of our communities. And lastly, reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and the overall negative effects of climate change. Okay, next slide, we're going to get into what does the adoption process look like. If you're interested in a REACH code, what exactly all goes on? What does the work entail? So first, you would reach out to CPA for support. So there's the email address. You can email CPA REACH codes at cleanpoweralliance.org and get this whole process started. What that will roll into is an introductory meeting with TRC and CPA, and we'll go through, what does this look like? What can we provide to you? And from there, you could sign a participation agreement, which would lead to a kickoff meeting. That's where we can start the research process, really. We can start looking at any data needs, any education needs, and get timelines approved for council. So when do we want to do a study session? We'll be prepared to present at that study session with slides and kind of education for council and the community on what are all of your options? What should we consider? Throughout that whole process, our goal will be to develop draft code for review. So we'll have a first draft of that model code based on any customizations you desire. From there, we'll move into some other steps. We'll move into, on the next slide, stakeholder engagement, which can take 1 to 3 months, and code customization. So we'll continue to incorporate feedback from these stakeholder events into the code and kind of finalizing it in that process to lead it into a first council reading, which we will be there to support you with questions and making sure that you have all the support you need to be confident in what you're proposing. For both the first council reading and the second council reading, we'll support you for that. After it goes through that council process, assuming it is adopted, we can help you with the submittal to the CBSC and or CEC, depending on if the cost effectiveness is required. And last to reach code is going to go into effect. That can be a total of 4 to 8 months. As Chico brought up earlier, this program is currently going throughout the year. So now could be a really, really good time if you're interested in anything like this to engage us and make sure that you have the time that you need to get a reach code in place, or at least get you most of the way there. A couple other timeline considerations to keep in mind is that there is a triennial cycle for our energy code, and that will be the 2025 energy code, which will be enforced on January 1st of 2026. So just from a timing perspective, particularly if you're interested in a new construction reach code, it could be really beneficial to start working on that now so that by the time you put the ordinance together, take it to council and get it approved, you can still have about a full year of implementation before anything is changing at the state level. On the EV side, something you might want to consider is that there was just an intervening code update that went into effect at the start of this month. So just 2 weeks, 3 weeks old at this point. And that means if you have an EVI reach code, this might be a good time to refresh that and upgrade it to make sure it's still a reach, it's still going beyond the state level, or otherwise it might just be a good time where people are thinking about electric vehicle infrastructure to consider if you want to reach beyond what the state intervening level is and do a little bit more. Okay, next slide, I want to talk about who is out there working on a reach code. Chico brought up those jurisdictions that are currently engaged and working through a reach code right now. So we have Ojai, who's working on existing buildings. We have Rolling Hills Estates, who's looking at new construction. We have Santa Monica, who is looking at everything across the board. Love to see it. And we've got West Hollywood, who's looking at existing buildings. So that's specifically in the Los Angeles County and Ventura County cities. There's a lot of other cities throughout California who are looking at policies and looking to adopt different things. So this is just a subset of them, but we have Brisbane, East Palo Alto, Mountain View, Palo Alto, Santa Cruz, and San Luis Obispo. And all of those different cities are looking at the full range of policies as well. Some of them have already adopted them. Some of them are in process of adopting them. So we're seeing a lot of interest kind of across the state on these different kinds of policies, which is a very exciting time. And at this point, I mentioned Santa Monica, they're looking at a lot of interesting things. I will hand it over to the Santa Monica team to introduce themselves and tell you more about what they have been working on recently.
Thanks, Taylor, and hi, everyone. My name is Ariana Vito, and I'm with the City of Santa Monica's Office of Sustainability and the Environment. I lead a lot of our building electrification as well as EV charging projects and policies. So I'll kick things off, and then I'll pass it over to my colleague, Nico. So just to give some context and overview, you can go to the next slide. I'm going to just start off with an overview of our climate action adaptation plan, which includes some zero net carbon building objectives, such as discouraging fossil fuel use in new buildings and also reducing fossil fuel use in existing buildings. And we have a couple specific action items listed here that are included in our climate action plan. And so these have really guided a lot of our work in this space. You can go to the next slide. So we have, as many other cities did, we adopted a zero emission building code requiring all electric new construction back in 2022. And this unfortunately has been paused due to the Berkeley case that Taylor reviewed. And so we're in the process right now of developing a local amendment to the California Energy Code through what's known as the energy performance approach, or is also sometimes called the source energy margin approach. And we've been working with TRC and the Clean Power Lines team through the CPA Reach Code program for this policy, which we're aiming to bring to council in September. And just for those who are less familiar with it, the crux of this policy change will be requiring increased source energy margins compared to the standard design of the building. So the end goal is really still encouraging more electric appliances, but there is not an outright ban on gas appliances. And then for the EV charger reach code, we've adopted a couple for the past 2 building cycles. We recently went to council to adopt a new one to take into account the pretty substantial changes that we saw in the 2024 Cal Green intervening code cycle update. So we went ahead and replaced our previous reach code with Cal Green Tier 1. So that's for new construction. And you can go to the next slide. And this is just a snapshot of our emissions from our latest greenhouse gas emission inventory. So looks sort of similar to what Taylor shared, but the main takeaway from it is that our building emissions account for 26% of the city's carbon emissions. We are a CPA member city on the 100% clean power rate, so that has reduced our electricity emissions substantially. So the next big task, of course, is reducing emissions from the existing building sector. So I'll pass it over to Nico.
Thanks, Ariana. Carmen, you can move to the next slide. So yeah, I'm Nico Predock. I am also with the City of Santa Monica in the Office of Sustainability and Environment. And I've been supporting on the existing building decarbonization work. I also work on coastal adaptation and restoration projects as well. So touching both the mitigation and action sides of our adaptation sides of our climate action adaptation plan. So covering a couple of the key policies that we've identified to meet our cap goals and address the portion of emissions coming from the city's existing building sector. These 2 major existing building policy options we've identified are building performance standards and existing building reach codes. So we initially worked with community-based organizations to develop an existing building electrification roadmap that outlines existing building decarb policy options. We did this originally through Rocky Mountain Institute's California Equitable Home Electrification Program. And through that program, we analyzed Santa Monica's building stock to inform the roadmap. The goal of the roadmap being to just guide our sort of policy momentum forward for existing building decarb work. So the first policy, building performance standards, we've been working on for about 1.5 years now. We've had a series of stakeholder meetings and are planning to take the policy to council in September of this year. And then to give an overview of what that policy looks like, the BPS will be rolled out in 2 phases. The first covering buildings larger than 50,000 square feet, and the second, after a few years of benchmarking, will cover buildings larger than 20,000 square feet, both commercial and residential buildings. And CPA has been involved in the policy process for BPS and has attended our stakeholder meetings, not necessarily in an official capacity. Utilities play a critical role in BPS to provide quality, building level data to owners for reporting. So it's been great to have CPA in the room there and just, being involved in our BPS work. But the main focus of our work with CPA has been on existing building reach codes. And that's what I'm here to talk more about today. Really to, designed to cover the other portion of our building stock. Existing building reach codes are going to focus on smaller single, multifamily, and potentially commercial buildings under 20,000 square feet. And opposed to reducing emissions over a long period of time, like building performance standards. The REACH code will be triggered either at time of property sale or time of permit for projects over a certain size, type, or value. And both our climate action adaptation plan as well as the roadmap for existing buildings call out time of sale or time of renovation policies as priority measures to achieve the building decarb needed to meet goals in our climate action plan. I'll get a little more into details on the REACH codes in a bit. Can move to the next slide, please. So yeah, looking at the CPA REACH code program that we've been participating in, wanted to just give an overview of how we've been working with CPA and TRC and the other members of the team to develop the existing building REACH code policy. About a year ago, Santa Monica applied to CPA's existing buildings REACH code program. And we've been working with the technical assistance team since then. The first sort of order of business on our end when we had our initial kickoff was to analyze the city's existing building stock. Work we'd done already there, permit data, property sales data, and any other information that would sort of give us a sense of how we might want to construct the policy. That was kind of a home base, and we kind of launched our work from there. After that, the REACH codes team has been working with us to on their end, refine code development, suggesting various approaches to the REACH codes, and also to initiate the public engagement process. So we've hosted a few working group meetings with specific groups in Santa Monica to understand their priorities, from residents, property owners, community-based organizations, and other experts in the green building space. And, the combination of analysis work and understanding community priorities has led us to the development of a few key REACH code options for Santa Monica. Next slide, please. So yeah, looking at the options for the REACH codes that we've developed so far, beginning with the time of sale policy, we looked at property sales data, and the REACH code team found that around 1.4% of all residential homes in Santa Monica are transacted on or sold annually. So we determined that time of sale might not have the most substantial short-term impact, but could definitely see long-term decarbonization from the time of sale approach. Requirements for time of sale mirroring a policy similar to one that Berkeley's working on, where an energy audit or assessment is required at the time of listing. And depending on whether or not a home has a heat pump, the property owner might be required to include additional energy efficiency, electric readiness, or electrification measures to be in compliance. And we determined that time of sale policy would apply mostly to single family homes because they're sold more frequently in the city than multifamily, even though we want to have a comprehensive approach and cover multifamily as well. The next sort of REACH code trigger option that the team analyzed is one similar to approaches being taken in San Luis Obispo and Santa Cruz, and that's time of permit or time of renovation policy, kind of interchangeable terminology there. And then this is where we would develop a sort of menu of upgrade options using both cost-effective studies and local data to determine what those options might be that a property would need to meet either at time of mechanical or building combo permit, or when a property is doing an area remodel like a kitchen or laundry room. We analyzed permit data here as well and found that around 12% of mechanical permits mention heat pumps in Santa Monica. So there's room to touch a larger percentage of Santa Monica's building stock there. And it was really helpful work that the REACH code team did on their end to conduct that permit analysis and sales data, because it kind of helped refine how we want these individual REACH code trigger requirements to look. And then lastly, as mentioned earlier by Taylor, this work's being underpinned by the regional momentum to include zero nitrous oxide emission requirements at time of sale for space and water heating. And the sort of approach we're taking in stakeholder conversations is that this is going to happen kind of whether you like it or not. So we want to use these policies as a lever to encourage electric readiness, to ensure that these properties are prepared to install electric heating systems for space and water heating when the time comes. Next slide, please. And then, just to cover some of the stakeholder engagement work we've done, Ramey and Associates, part of the CPA REACH code team, were a critical part of the work we've done to help the city host a few focus group meetings. And then out of the stakeholder groups we talked to, the most pushback we received was kind of the small mom and pop multifamily building owners, and Raymond Associates were helpful there in helping us navigate those conversations and come up with good framing, and pitching the reach codes and getting positive input rather than just pushback. But just to cover some of the concerns that those groups had, we sort of developed additional priorities out of those concerns for existing building reach codes. We want to try to ensure that there's access to upfront funding, whether that be through the city or through the various regional, federal, and state programs and incentives out there, and to ensure that the upgrades we require through the reach code are cost effective to a certain extent, or that there are cost effective options. And yeah, the kind of public process in these meetings showed us that building flexibility into the policy is essential for sure. We want to include a menu of upgrade options when the code is triggered, and we want to ensure that there are exemptions when needed for hardship circumstances. So CPA and the TRC and the reach code team has been excellent at helping us kind of determine what exemptions we might need to consider. And then for the kind of broad timeline moving forward, we hosted the focus group meetings in the spring of this year. We're looking to host 1 or 2 more public workshops this summer. We're looking to develop an existing building reach code advisory group or roundtable, with the goal of bringing this to council for adoption in late fall or early winter of this year. And that's being supported by ongoing code development activities in the background from TRC and the rest of the reach codes team as well. So it's been good work, and we are certainly chugging along. I will leave things there. Hand it back to you.
Thank you so much, Nico and Ariana, for that overview and sharing your experience with reach codes. It's truly amazing to see the work you and the team are doing to help provide leadership in the region and even in the state. So I know we promised a short Q&A here, and actually don't see any Q&A questions for Santa Monica yet, but we're running a little behind schedule, so we'll save any direct questions about Santa Monica's efforts for the end. As a reminder, feel free to put it in the Q&A box there. And now it's my pleasure to pass it back to Taylor from TRC to provide an overview of the resources available through cpareachcodes.org.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. Okay, let's talk about what some of these resources and model codes are. First, quick reminder, what are the types of reach codes? There's 2 main categories that you can think of that are kind of in the orange. So there's new constructions in existing buildings, so one on the building side, and then there's electric vehicle infrastructure on the other side. One quick note on the building side is that there's a couple different pathways through which you can amend these. One is through the energy code, the other is through CalGreen, etc. And through the energy code, there's 2 different kind of classifications. So you can make an amendment to the prescriptive codes. You can think of the prescriptive codes as more of like your checklist item. You go through and you complete all the items on the checklist, and then you're all good to go. The other side of that is a performance code. And what that means is you kind of have a target or a budget to meet. And how you meet that is totally flexible. It's up to you as long as you can prove that you do meet that target. Many in California go through the performance pathway, and they like that flexibility. And that'll be important as we talk about on the next slide, the energy performance approach. So when it comes to new construction, there's a couple different policies. One of the main ones that we'll chat about today is the energy performance approach. The energy performance approach requires a higher source energy compliance margin than what the state requires through the performance path of the energy code, part 6. So like we just talked about, the performance path is one way to amend it. The energy performance approach kind of operates on the basis of that performance path in the current code. So some of the advantages for an energy performance approach is that it's less legally risky because it's pretty explicitly allowing methane gas pathways. It's still going to require that if you're using gas appliances, you have to have additional decarbonization methods installed with that, but it is allowing them to be installed. So that's kind of the balance we have to walk between the legal risk and the emissions savings. One of the other advantages is that it can provide an all-electric cost-effective pathway. So that's super important when we're thinking about the cost impacts, is that that electric pathway can be cost-effective. Another advantage of this approach is that this enforcement process is already in place. It's really the compliance margin that we're changing. So since this is a feature of the performance path in the existing code, most of the process is already built out. It's just the number that's going to be checked for will change. And that number is going to depend on what climate zone you're in and what building type we're talking about. So those are some of the advantages. Let's jump over to the challenges. An energy performance approach is going to be limited to regulating space heating and cooling and water heating. And yet again, that's a reflection of it going through the performance path, what equipment it can touch. So that means it's not going to be going after cooking, laundry, etc. Those other gas appliances, the other appliances that can use gas. One of the other challenges is that it's just going to be lower carbon savings compared to an all-electric only pathway. So comparing it to some of the past REACH codes that we've pursued before the CRA versus Berkeley ruling, it will be a reduced amount of emission savings compared to that. That being said, we're seeing a lot of jurisdictions move forward with this approach. We've got East Palo Alto, Encinitas, Palo Alto, Santa Cruz, San Jose, and San Luis Obispo, who have all adopted an energy performance approach in about the last year, year and a half. There are other strategies to consider, one of which is the air quality approach. This approach works by regulating building or appliance emissions, such as through CalGreen Part 11. If you're interested in this approach, we're happy to follow up with you one-on-one and talk about the details and considerations there. Okay, on the next slide, we're going to go into a little bit more detail about how an energy performance approach works. So really, I used the word source energy on the last slide. What source energy is a proxy for carbon emissions, and the energy performance approach sets a stricter regulation of that source energy margin. This is currently regulated through the energy code, and the goal is to reduce new building emissions and prepare the buildings for future electrification as well. So within the energy performance approach, there are electric readiness components if you are choosing to use gas appliances. So how does it work? Typically, this is going to take effect through amendments to the Energy Code, Title 24, Part 6. And building applicants who use the performance path will need to meet that stricter source energy target. We chatted about enforcement. It's roughly the same, just changing what that number is. So education with your building official and department to make sure that is clearly communicated. In terms of the support that's available for this approach, we can give you technical assistance. We can help you with your model code language and customization. We can offer you staff report templates for when you are taking this and sharing this with council. And we can also be there at council to support your meetings. Okay, next slide. So the past REACH code that we've talked about on this call, a natural gas ban or an all-electric REACH code, was found to be preempted by the Federal Energy Policy and Conservation Act. So I wanted to provide a little bit of context about what that act means and why is an energy performance approach different than what we've done in the past, because that can lead to a lot of hesitation and kind of legal concerns. So EPCA has a specific exemption through something that's called the 7-factor test. And a couple of those factors are shown on the left-hand side of this slide. And the CEC has used this exemption path, the 7-factor test, for decades. We could review all of the details of the 7-factor test with you one-on-one if you're interested, but the high-level takeaway here is that the energy performance approach seems to be aligned with this 7-factor test in the same way that the California Energy Code is. And that's because the energy performance approach operates on the performance pathway of the Energy Code, and that's the modifications in terms of the code language we're making there. So that's why we say that this option is one that is going to mitigate your legal risk. It's because it's very similar to the existing elements of the Energy Code today, and we believe it's aligned with these 7 factors. Okay, and on the next slide, we're going to switch from buildings and we're going to talk about electric vehicle infrastructure for just a second. So biggest question is, what is electric vehicle infrastructure? At a high level, it is the integral equipment and materials necessary to support electric vehicle charging. Okay, but what does that mean? Let's talk about physically, what does that mean? What is this infrastructure? So it would include electrical capacity, that could be utility service, transformers, and feeders. It could be panel space for EV dedicated breakers. It could be conduit, raceways, and pathways for circuits. It could also look like wiring for circuits for EV charging. Or it could be EV dedicated receptacles or charging equipment. It could also be the actual plug that you take from the charger and the cord that you use to attach it to your car and charge. Or it could be non-physical, it could be energy management software as well. So there's a lot of different things that can go into an electric vehicle infrastructure reach code, but the basis of it is that a reach code would increase the requirements beyond the state level, and you could do that customized for each building stock. You could also customize or for each building type, and it could be customized to your building stock in your jurisdiction and your individual goals. So an example of that, getting to 100% access for EV charging for new development multifamily complexes is a big focus for equity right now. It's something that's being proposed for the 2025 Cal Green Code. So that's an example of how you could reach now on an electric vehicle code. Okay, next slide, we'll hop into existing buildings. So there are a lot of different options when it comes to existing buildings, but first I want to talk about why they're important. Why does it matter to go after existing buildings when it comes to a reach code? One is that the vast majority of the housing stock is existing buildings. So impacting existing buildings is often the largest opportunity that you will have to reduce emissions, and it can happen more slowly over time in order to address that volume of buildings. So it can be really important and really impactful to start earlier and start now on an existing building policy. Depending on where you are and what your housing stock looks like, older buildings might have been built at a time that predated building codes and therefore don't incorporate energy efficiency. And energy use is one consideration there, right? How do we reduce our energy use? But the other side of that consideration is the comfort and the housing quality for the occupant, which can be really impactful from an existing building reach code. So those are all the benefits, those are all the good things, those are all the reasons we're talking about existing buildings. We also have to consider that pursuing existing buildings is more complicated than new construction because there's more variables to consider with something that is already built. There is less flexibility, there are more clear boundaries on where your property is. And what that means is the problem solving for some of these things that come up require more creativity and sometimes more resources too. And with that being said, that's why many of the policies I'm showing you here prioritize those key opportunity areas or flexible compliance pathways with thought through exceptions. So it's really thought about like, where's the low hanging fruit in existing buildings? What can we go after in the easiest way? And let's go do that now if we can. So I'm going to briefly just talk through these 4 different approaches. I won't go into the details, but if you would like them, we're happy to chat with you on one-on-one conversation as well. So a time of replacement policy would require that property owners at the time of equipment replacement, so that could look like if you're upgrading your equipment or if it's a burnout, abide by certain zero NOx requirements and or electric readiness requirements. For time of renovation, that's when you have an applicant that's already pulling a permit for a renovation for some reason and requiring that project to abide by certain energy efficiency measures and or electric readiness requirements. We've also got building performance standards, which the Santa Monica team touched on. So that's requiring property owners to regularly report energy or emissions use intensity. And in addition, the policy could require incremental reductions in EUI over a set time horizon. Lastly, we have time of property transfer. So that's really focused on real estate transactions and disclosing relevant information at that time of sale or incentivizing or requiring certain home improvement projects at that time of sale. Okay, so that's your high-level overview of existing buildings. Happy to follow up if anyone has questions there. And then on our next slide, I just want to call out what other resources are available and where can you find them? So where could you find slides, model codes, etc. That is going to be at cpareachcodes.org. So this website should be super helpful for any questions you have. There's an FAQ document. There's a really, really comprehensive slide library, which I think is super helpful. There's those model codes, and there's more. So happy to have that resource available for you all. And I will now hand it off to Tim to introduce our next presenters.
Thank you so much, Taylor, for all that reach code knowledge. And we do get a couple questions of these slides and recordings can be shared on the website, and they will be. So that'll be an additional resource that you can find on cpareachcodes.org. And as all you are probably seeing, some of these reach code aspects can get pretty technical. And as Taylor and Shiko mentioned, with about 5 months left remaining on this program, now is an opportune time to take advantage of this program's free technical assistance to support you with your questions and concerns coming from City Council or the community. So now it's my pleasure to introduce a very important aspect of reach code adoption that the program can provide you guidance with, and that's stakeholder engagement and equitable policy adoption. Sammy Taylor from Ramey Associates will kick us off with stakeholder support, and Grace Hutt from Sage will be joining with renter protection policy education. Take it away, Sammy.
Thanks, Tim. Hello, everyone. My name is Sammy Taylor, and I'm a senior sustainability planner with Ramey Associates. We are primarily an urban planning firm with the sustainability and climate arm. I focus mainly on climate action planning and greenhouse gas analyses, green building and building decarbonization, and of course, community engagement. Today, I'm going to run through some of the best practices and considerations for reach code outreach. Next slide, please. So first, although, like we just saw, reach codes are very technical, we know that these policies have real impacts on real people and merit centering equity in the outreach and planning processes. There are several tools and guides to help identify vulnerable or historically marginalized populations that may need targeted outreach and additional support throughout the process. This slide shows and lists some resources that provide staff with a framework for considering equity in policymaking. These frameworks ask staff to consider questions similar to those in the diagram on the right about identifying affected community members and designing an effective engagement process that reflects how to engage people in a culturally appropriate way and using accessible engagement activities to really generate that valuable input and feedback that informs the policymaking process. Next slide. So like I mentioned, identifying stakeholders is essential for developing a successful reach code. This slide provides insight into which stakeholders may need targeted or additional outreach. This may include sensitive populations such as older adults, cost-burdened households and fixed income residents, the LGBTQIA+ community, unhoused and previously unhoused people, people with disabilities, and communities of color. Other stakeholders who may need additional support include property owners and managers, especially those small mom and pop owners like you heard from the city of Santa Monica, renters and tenants, especially those in rent stabilized buildings, neighborhood associations, restaurant associations, hospitality groups, chamber and real estate organizations, and of course, environmental advocates. Additionally, staff may want to consider reaching out to and coordinating with internal stakeholders, such as those related city departments like building and safety, planning, and public works, in order to share data, know what data they want to collect and analyze, unify community messaging, and incorporate valuable insights and experiences into reach code development. Next slide. So after you identified stakeholders, the next step of the community engagement process is determining which type of outreach activities are appropriate and effective. So this slide lists the type of outreach activities that we found to be most effective during various phases of the code development process. During the discovery phase, we're trying to listen and learn from the community, as well as raise awareness about the project. Targeted outreach to those most affected by the policy through focus groups and survey has proven to be very helpful. Second, during the policy development phase, it's important to share updates and policy options with the broader community in order to hear their feedback and ideas about more of the reach code specifics. Activities that we found to be most effective at this stage are larger community workshops and again, more detailed surveys. And finally, in order for the adopted reach code to be implemented successfully, community education is essential. Some of the most successful outreach strategies for this include sharing case studies and success stories, promoting available resources through virtual channels and in places like the planning counter or at the library, hosting demonstration events, especially for EVs and induction cooktops, and continued targeted outreach to our identified stakeholders. And with that, I'll pass it on to Grace.
Thanks so much, Sammy. Hi, everyone. My name is Grace Hutt. I am a program coordinator at Strategic Actions for a Just Economy, also known as SAGE. We are a community-based organization in South LA, and I am part of a small team doing work at the intersection of building decarbonization and tenant protections, trying to make sure that tenants are protected during the decarbonization process and able to reap the benefits of decarbonization. So I'm going to talk a bit about the impact that a policy like REACH codes can have on tenants. Renters are often an overlooked population in conversations about decarbonization and electrification. They have a lot to gain from these efforts in terms of living in healthier housing and having lower energy bills. But decarbonization, if not implemented equitably, can pose some serious risks to tenants, especially low income ones. So since decarbonization retrofitting can be costly, we are concerned that property owners will want to pass on the costs of retrofitting to tenants, or will try to displace tenants before or during the retrofitting process, and then rent the units out at a higher rate to recoup some of those costs. So the tenant impacts of any decarbonization effort will depend on the kinds of protections that tenants have. In California, there are three main categories of protections. There are tenants who are covered by a local rent stabilization ordinance. There are tenants covered by AB 1482, which is the state's rent stabilization law. And then there are tenants who are exempt from both local and state protections because they live in newer buildings or buildings that are otherwise exempt. So I'm just kind of going to run through these categories and talk a bit about what some of the concerns for tenants are. For tenants that are covered by local rent stabilization ordinances, these ordinances tend to be the strongest form of tenant protections that we have, but there are still gaps. Particularly, most of these ordinances include pass-through cost programs that allow landlords to pass on the costs of retrofits to tenants. For example, the city of Los Angeles has a local rent stabilization ordinance. And as part of that ordinance, we have the primary renovation work program, which allows landlords to pass on 100% of the costs of primary renovation work to tenants. And that can include work like upgrading electrical paneling, improving cooling and heating systems. So very much related to decarbonization. And that can result in up to a 10% rent increase, permanent rent increase for tenants on top of already allowable rent increases under the city's rent stabilization ordinance. So a very significant jump for low income renters, especially. There's also this issue of construction as harassment, which refers to the use of renovation work as a tool to force tenants out of their home. We've seen a lot of cases of landlords performing construction work in a manner that harms tenants by exposing them to dust and debris, turning off heat or hot water for weeks, things like that. And this is typically used as a tactic to circumvent rent stabilization and eviction protections. So there's certainly a concern that because building decarbonization requires or encourages retrofit work, this could give cover to landlords using construction as harassment. And then for tenants who are covered by the statewide law, AB 1482, for example, tenants in the city of Ventura do not have local protections under a local ordinance. They are covered by the statewide law. And the statewide law allows evictions for substantial remodels. So it actually includes an exception that says, or called a loophole that says landlords can evict tenants if they plan to remodel the unit, and the remodel is significant enough that it will take more than 30 days and necessitate that tenants vacate. Unfortunately, we see this loophole being used all the time dishonestly. Building decarbonization retrofits could be extensive enough to trigger this a loophole in earnest, but even if a retrofit can be done quickly and easily, we see instances where property owners exaggerate the timeline or prolong the work deliberately to trigger an eviction. We've seen cases of this happening all over the state, and it's a really important consideration as we mandate or encourage decarbonization. Next slide, please. So these are some of the considerations that need to be taken into account when designing local policy like REACH codes. But there are a lot of things that local governments can do to protect tenants while also electrifying and improving the energy efficiency of buildings to prevent rent burden. One of the strongest tools we have is rent stabilization ordinances. These cap the amount that a property owner can increase rent annually. We can also prohibit pass-through costs for work related to energy efficiency and electrification. For example, the city of West Hollywood actually banned pass-through costs for their seismic retrofit program. So tenants did not have to incur costs through that program. To prevent evictions and keep people housed, just cause eviction ordinances that prevent arbitrary eviction are a really strong tool. And as mentioned, we really need to close that substantial remodel loophole, both on the local and state level, in order to protect tenants from displacement related to decarbonization. And then lastly, to protect tenants from disruptive construction, local housing departments can require landlords to submit plans as to how they will mitigate construction impacts on tenants, or pay to relocate them temporarily if they cannot remain safely in their homes. We have that in place in Los Angeles. It's called our Tenant Habitability Program. And then local jurisdictions can also consider adopting penalties for illegal construction or rent reductions for tenants who experience very invasive construction. And with that, I will pass it back to Tim.
Thank you, Grace, and thank you, Sammy, for such an important overview of an aspect of REACH code adoption that we can support you with. So we have reached the end of presentations. We're going to hop into Q&A, but real quick, we have one last poll for the audience. Are you interested in pursuing a REACH code? What kind of REACH code are you interested in? And are you interested in participating in the CPA REACH code program? So we'll just give that a minute. And again, feel free to enter any questions that you have in the Q&A box, and we'll do our best to answer it here with the last 10 minutes. And while we wait a couple more seconds here for everyone to fill out the poll, just as a reminder, all these slides will be shared on the website as well as the recording at cpareachcodes.org, probably within the next 2 weeks. Now let's see how the audience has answered. All right, a majority, 67%, are interested in pursuing a REACH code. Great to hear. No no's, which is great, and a few want to learn more. So definitely reach out to us. Our contact info will be at the end of the slides. And as far as interest in REACH codes, it looks like everybody is interested in all, both new construction, existing buildings, and EVI. And it looks like 83% of you are interested in participating in the CPA REACH code program, and a few of you, or one of you, actually maybe next year. Well, thank you all for submitting your answers to that poll. Let's hop into some Q&A. All right, so we have one question here from Wesley. Taylor, this one's going to be for you. Are flexible measures, flex compliance, flex paths, and flexible policy and a menu the same things? Great question, Wesley.
This is a great question. Language can be really tricky in codes, and we talk about this stuff internally all the time. It can be a headache. But you've got the point, yes, that they're all hitting on the same flexible kind of side of it, right? Which is really important for policy success. How do we make policies flexible? How do we give people choices? The one from this list that is different and that we should pull out is the flex path. So the flex path refers to a specific policy approach for existing buildings, And what that means is we just have like a model code put together for a flex path. And within that flex path, there is a menu of options or like a table of measures that can, when people are doing large renovation projects, would require folks to comply with a certain number of the measures in that menu. So they're all related to flexibility. Yes, the one that is different is the flex path, just because it's a specific approach.
Great, thank you. And another follow-up question actually from Wesley and someone else in the audience here. Shiko, this one's actually for you. Can you reiterate what is happening to the program at the end of the 5 months, at the end of the year? And will the CPA Reach Code program continue in some capacity after December 2024?
Yeah, great question. So right now the program is slated to end at the end of the year. We're investigating how we want to move forward. A lot of that will be based on how many jurisdictions sign on now. Due to the Ninth Circuit ruling, we had a smaller number of cities participate than we initially anticipated, but we're looking at ways to continue supporting jurisdictions that sign on now and looking at whether or not we want to expand the program beyond December, beyond the end of December of this year. So I think it's still a great time to sign on. And if you do participate, we'll look at ways to continue providing support through the adoption process.
Thanks, Shiko. And there's actually a follow-up question here for you. Excuse me. Do we have to participate in the program with the participation agreement to utilize the model reach codes?
So the model reach codes are kind of out in the ether, and they will be available to anyone. If all you need is a model code and you have staff that want to take it from there, we have that on our website. You can access that, and wonderful. If you want some more customized support from TRC, like leveraging all of their experience working with a number of different jurisdictions up and down the state, then we would want you to sign a participation agreement that really just says you intend to participate in the program, and that would also make you eligible for a financial award. So even if you sign the participation agreement, you're still not obligated to take a code to council. You're not obligated to spend a certain amount of time with TRC once you sign that agreement, but it helps us determine who's active in the program and who really wants to pursue this with the support we're providing. And as I said, makes you eligible for that financial award.
Great, thanks, Chico. All right. Feel free to answer or enter any other questions you may have. Those were great questions. We do have a question here that we typically get a lot, with electrification and Farhad. This one's for you. Can the grid handle the load increase of all these electric appliances and vehicles? I think we also have our good friends over at SoCal Edison, Amy Disher, on the line. So maybe you can also chime in too after Farhad gives its response.
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Farhad. I've been in the background here, making sure everything's going smooth. So yeah, I support the Reach Codes programs with oversight across the state, and particularly the Clean Power Alliance program. Can the grid handle the load increase? This is a very complex question. I'm going to start with the bad news. The bad news is that our grid is getting exacerbated. The strain on the grid is getting exacerbated due to climate change, extreme climate events, higher heat, wildfires, winter storms. All of these events are getting more intense, and they're necessitating grid hardening, right? Improving our grid. Another kind of piece of maybe not great news is that there's no one agency that's in charge of ensuring grid reliability. It's a joint effort between the Energy Commission, the Public Utilities Commission, independent system operator, the utilities themselves. Now I can assure you that the governor's office is probably one of the highest priorities is ensuring grid reliability and ensuring all these agencies and entities are working together. And that's really the kind of, it's not great that we have dispersed responsibilities, but because this is such a big problem, we have a lot of people working on it. Particularly in Clean Power Lines territory, the peak is in the summer. That's where we're going to see the brownouts, and that's what happened in August 2020. So what occurs when we electrify is we actually increase our winter load. So what California Energy Commission's estimates show under the analysis they did for AB 3232, highly encourage you all to go to the Energy Commission's website and check out that analysis, is that in CPA region, that winter load does not reach the summer peak. So it is still going to be a cooling dominated type of condition that we need to address. That's what we need to size our grid for. Now, luckily, electric appliances have load shifting capabilities. We can change our thermostat set points. We've also, as a state, exponentially ramped up our battery storage installations at the utility level. And that improves reliability of the grid dramatically because we're not relying on our generators, wind blowing, sun shining, and those things. And it increases our options, our tool sets available. We've had major heat events since August 2020 without persistent, widespread brownouts. They've really been targeted since then. So I think that we're heading in the right direction. There's a lot of very smart and very dedicated people working on this problem. And it's the best way that we have, electrification is the best way to have to mitigate climate change, mitigate future grid strain. And that's what AB 3232 findings were.
Great, thanks, Farhad. Is there anyone from the SE team that wanted to chime in? Actually, I don't know if the audience has the option to unmute themselves, so apologies there, but I know the team is happy to address any of your questions. We do often collaborate on a lot of these introductory meetings, so we can definitely address those questions if they are concerns of your council or community. With that being said, I think we can wrap up the Q&A and show the next slide with our contact information. On behalf of this whole CPA Reach Code program, thank you for attending. This recording and slides will be up on the cpareachcodes.org website within the next 2 weeks. And please do not hesitate to reach out with any further questions or needs for support. We're here to help until the end of the year. So we highly encourage any jurisdiction that is interested in learning more and participating to reach out as soon as possible. We hope you have a great day, and thanks again for attending. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.